So Ann Arbor has so many wonderful environmental initiatives. It's really a privilege to live in a place like this, which is so environmentally friendly. And so light pollution control is completely consistent with all of these initiatives. We are very proud of Ann Arbor for being a place that has pioneered the conversion to energy-efficient LEDs. And one thing about these LEDs is that a slight but glaring omission, if I may use the word, is that they have not taken into consideration the light pollution that comes from these light sources. So if you look at these LEDs right here, and you look down on them, these are a different location. These are from the Washington parking structure looking down. But you can see that these are the same kind, and they are actually producing a lot of uplight, as you can see right here. And there are always new projects going on around Ann Arbor. And a lot of them are not particularly dark sky friendly. And that's why we feel like some additional action would be very, very helpful. This is not a new issue. Many of you, I know, have already heard about this. And this has been brought to the city at some way, shape, or form for at least 15 years, as I've come to learn. It's new to me, but the more I talk to people, the more I find out about previous attempts. And in fact, in the project summary for the LED project, conversion project, there's even mention here of a dark skies initiative. That was in 2011. So it's quite surprising then that the following year, when the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan was issued, there's no mention whatsoever about light pollution control. So that was a bit surprising. So fast forward, now we're in 2017, and in July, there was this resolution to proceed with this $1 million project to replace the pedestrian globe lights, and globes, as you saw, are about the worst possible design for light pollution, to replace them with more of the same. And so that was when I myself finally got involved, and we organized a letter to the City Council, which the council members received in July. And the following week, after the City Council received our letter, they also passed a resolution to change the zoning code here such that new buildings downtown should have a minimum of 60% facade that is windows or glazing. Windows or glazing are also a disaster from a light pollution standpoint because, of course, they will reflect perfectly useful and wanted downlight into light polluting uplight. You also see all of this interior light that now becomes light pollution potentially going up into the sky. And then, of course, the reflections of these only add to the confusion for wildlife. By the way, look at how beautifully we're illuminating the bottoms of these trees. So what we really feel would be very helpful would be to look at this again from a broad view and include light pollution control in the Ann Arbor Climate Action Plan. And in particular, to have a city ordinance to actually control light pollution. If we wanted to do this really comprehensively and do it right, a good idea would be to do a full audit of what lighting we have, what we need and what we don't need. And in particular, I can specify that in the plan right now, the specifications for the globe lights and the $1 million project, that it would be really good just to specify a maximum color temperature for these globes. Right now, they are specified to be 3,000 plus or minus 250. It would be better just to say that they should be 3,000 or less. And also, similarly, a maximum lumen output, which is the luminosity output by the lights. It would be very, very helpful. Of course, we would welcome a resolution from the Environmental Commission to help start these kinds of activities. So basically, controlling light pollution is fairly straightforward. It's the kind of thing that you can really go back 100% and say, once the problem has been solved, it's really solved. It's not as bad as trying to do toxic waste, where when you try to get rid of toxic waste, there's always some left behind. Once you turn off the lights are off. So the plan would hopefully be to light only what is needed, no more than needed, and when needed. This will help to restore the natural environment and habitat, to save energy, to improve safety, improve our health, and help everyone reconnect with the night sky. And in summary, this is fully consistent with the values of Ann Arbor and of the state of Michigan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Will you take some questions?
Of course.
Are there questions?
So, from a standpoint of bird mortality, is there a Kelvin temperature that works the best with them and/or light color that's worse than others?
That's a great question, and in fact, I have some extra slides. So the color temperature. No, I didn't plant that. So we've got different gradations of white here, right? So we've got quote-unquote warm white, 3,000 degrees. Then we've got these whiter whites. And the way that this is specified by the lighting engineering community is in terms of this color temperature criterion, right? That's based on the idea that you have a thermal spectrum for something. So the thermal spectrum has a distinctive shape, and it will peak. Most of the light will come out at one particular wavelength that corresponds to color. And so that's why the color is very closely linked to the temperature. So you could say, for example, this is a 7,000 degree color, which peaks in the blue, and this is a 4,500 degree temperature, which peaks in the red. So therefore, temperatures that are higher are bluer, and temperatures that are lower are redder. And that goes along with the idea that blue light is more energetic than red light. Okay, so what gets tricky is that LEDs and other light sources are not thermal light sources. And that means their spectrum is actually not a thermal spectrum. And so you could have an LED that says, okay, well, our color temperature is 4,000 degrees. That means that the human eye will see 4,000 degree color, the same as though it were a thermal spectrum. But look at what this real spectrum looks like. So this is, again, the wavelength. So you're going from blue at this end to red at this end. And both of these plots here, both of these lines, correspond to a 4,000 degree color temperature. So the blue one is natural moonlight. It's reflecting the light from the sun. And then this black one is, I believe, an LED spectrum of some kind. Yeah, that's a white LED, which also, on average, gives you the same color temperature that your eye would perceive as a 4,000 degree. But you can see it's got this huge blue spike to it. So you're getting a lot more blue light in your eye. Now, this is based on the human response, right? You asked about other animals. So birds and other animals have different responses. Every species has their own response. And so what a bird would see here is probably not going to be a 4,000 degree temperature. And the problem is that what's good for one species is bad for another species. So it's very, very hard to try to make lighting species friendly because every species sees light differently. Does that answer your question?
Not well enough.
Is there anything else I can clarify?
Come back again and answer it better.
I'm sorry. Okay, maybe you could ask the question again.
Well, so there's a cell phone tower out on Earhart Road. It has a red light flashing on top. It has a white light flashing on top of it. Probably not LED. Which is better? There are wind rotors with lights on the top. Some of those, since they're so new, have LEDs. What should they be putting up there?
Well, exactly. So I think my answer is it depends, because it depends on which species you're trying to help.
Well, just birds.
And which species of bird?
Let's say sandhill cranes.
Right. So I'm not an ornithologist, so I couldn't tell you the answer. But whatever's good for sandhill cranes is probably not going to be good for doves, mourning doves.
That's frustrating.
Yes.
Come back again.
Well, yeah, we can invite an ornithologist next time.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
Then isn't the answer to your question really that that shielding and full shielding is what's
Exactly.
necessary here?
yes, I'm afraid so.
And then I'd follow up by saying, have there been instances in this country where globe lighting has been retrofit to become dark sky? And is there a potential opportunity there for creativity, ingenuity, entrepreneurial spirit to be able to look at the thousands of bulbs, thousands of fixtures that we have like that in this community and begin to make changes?
Right, yeah, so I'm afraid I don't know the answer to your question either. I think we might ask lighting engineers that question, if globe lights have been retrofitted. But yes, I think there's ample opportunity for creativity. Maybe we could just, now, you know, we would want to consult with the DDA as to whether they find this aesthetically acceptable, but could we just paint the insides of them so that only the bottom half is lit? That's pretty
I've
simple.
seen them
Put little hats
painted.
on
There's an
Little
apartment
hats on them?
complex on, like Traver Crossing or something on Plymouth and Barton that has them painted on the top.
Yeah, and we did a project on Main Street that used the standard globes, but they were dark on the top because we didn't want it shining into the, you know, second and third floor
Right, the
rooms.
light
So,
trespass,
which
exactly.
is the standard city fixture, just had an adaptation to it, but we ordered it that way, so I have no idea, you know, but the pole's still there, it's still, you know, I mean, so there's a lot of infrastructure that would still be existing, so that could be an option too in terms of retrofitting.
Yeah, absolutely. My understanding, I had the opportunity to speak with Crescent Slaughton and Nate Geisler and Chris Ellenbass and learned that the 90% or more of the cost, maybe it was even 95% of the cost of the lighting project, the $1 million project, was really for the poles,
Yeah.
not for the fixture.
Conduit, yeah.
But one last thing I wanted to mention in response to your comment was, Mr. Graham here was asking about birds, and he was specifically talking about the towers that had a red light and a white light flashing. I mean, we don't want to turn those things off. Those are things that are essential for safety, right?
Yeah, required by the
So
FAA.
those are necessary, and there's obviously going to have to be some lights that are simply necessary. But yes, in terms of any light where we're putting unnecessary light into the atmosphere, then the colors of those lights, you know, it's not going to help any species at the expense of a different species, so.
Thanks for your presentation. I have been to the Headlands. I didn't know they had won all those awards. But it is amazing to me how you could I mean, it's northern Michigan, so to me, it's dark enough. But it is amazing what a difference it makes in a 5-minute drive where you're still in the country. And it was amazing. My daughter was 7 at the time, or 8 at the time, and she was like, it exists. The Milky Way is there. You know, she had never seen it. And it is, so thanks for the work. I think it's important. And it seems that there might be some creativity for retrofitting, but I also think that maybe include it as a do not do anymore. You know,
Exactly.
as we do things, at least doing them correctly. And I don't know what the feedback was from City Council. I mean, it's probably something we didn't think about, right? Okay.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. I would like to amplify what you're saying by mentioning that I take a class of astronomy majors. These are people who are already advanced students in astronomy to Kitt Peak, Arizona. Every 2 years I have this class where I take them out there. And we get out there and they go, like your daughter, wow, the Milky Way. And I'm saying, have you never seen the Milky Way before? Because you can't see it in Michigan. All you have to do is drive out, you know, a little bit out of town, go to Dexter or someplace, maybe not in Dexter, but, you know, go out to Pinckney or drive out someplace dark. And you can see the Milky Way. But these astronomy students, half of them have not seen the Milky Way. And that was just amazing to me and very sad.
I'm putting you on the spot here, but I know that there is some portion of the city lights that are owned by DTE, and I don't quite remember how that works, or.
Right, so streetlights, I think we have about 2,000, DTE has about 5,000. Do you know how many lights U of M has?
About 3,000.
Yeah. So that's on the streetlight side, and again, I have to defer to Nate on what DTEs. I think we just talked with their lighting people, and they were talking about, you know, using flat LEDs so that they were fully shielded, and getting away from the rounded as they go forward. But I don't know what the distribution, it's something I can try and see if Nate can find out, and that's on the streetlight side of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, one comment, you know, you asked for comments at the beginning, but I am so impressed with the transparency of the Ann Arbor city government. I mean, I think we're just we've got to be at the front and center of making things accessible to the public, and I have really appreciated that. We have been able to actually find the map that shows who owns which street light of all of these street lights in Ann Arbor. I mean, I think that's phenomenal, and all the city resolutions and everything. But yes, so we discovered that the city only owns about 20% of the streetlights.
Right.
My question is, if the city council were to pass a resolution, would DTE have to comply with them? No, interesting, okay.
Nor would the university.
Nor would the university.
Yeah, and I think.
But they would, the
DTE is
university could be shamed into it. DTE might not.
Maybe not.
Madam Chair?
Talk stormwater.
Right.
But I would say DTE is making a push of some kind. I was just at the Ann Arbor Symphony, and you can now choose to do, you know, they are trying, whether it's greenwashing or real, or I don't know, but they are creating avenues. So maybe there is a move where it can be presented in a way that they could see it as part of adding to that. You know, I know they were just at the schools, and my daughter got a kit from DTE with all the, you know, how you can save things and whatnot. So I think maybe talking to whoever makes this kit and making it part of what they do. I know that they had LED lights as part of what they distributed. So I think that they're maybe 20 years ago they wouldn't have cared. Maybe now they do.
I think you're right about that, and I shouldn't be bad-mouthing them at all, because in fact, they are very cooperative, is my understanding. If you feel like you have light trespass, they will come and fix it. So I know of people who have had this issue, and they've called DTE, and they come and they put a shield on their light. So DTE is cooperative. Yeah, it's happened to you? Great.
And very clearly, the highway department, state highway department's putting down shielded lights.
Yes, they are.
There's there are none of these big expansive lights going up anymore.
Just one other thing, so through the site plan submission process, it's all cut-off optics, and anything moving forward or that's been done in the last several years all have those standards. And then we have some control over what's happening, you know, influence of what's happening over the city from the kind of city infrastructure point of view. But there's a whole lot of just parking lots that are lit with all these really awful fixtures. It seems to me it would be an interesting dimension of your advocacy to be able to have some sort of easy pamphlet kit thing to hand to the church or to the whatever, you know, to be able to say, we know you're going to have to replace your lights at some point anyway. Here's how you would work a shield. Just some sort of simple way for people to not, you know, spend a ton of money, but be able to make it a whole lot better. It may
Right.
not be the state-of-the-art thing, but it would be an interesting arm of your advocacy to be able to have a kind of super easy, low-hanging fruit thing to be able to, because that's a huge
Yeah.
chunk of what's out there. You know, we can only influence so much. So that's probably in some ways the biggest opportunity to be able to do the good that
Yeah,
you all are.
thank you very much for mentioning that. The National Optical Astronomy Observatories does have some kind of kits. They're not actual, like, retrofit kits.
Sure.
They're more like advocacy kits, where kind of outreach kinds of things. I think replacing lights themselves is fairly straightforward in many instances. I mean, I just did it on my own house, because I, too, was a light polluter. But I think you touch on one of the most important things, which is basically to get the public buy-in, right? People don't pollute on purpose. They
Right.
do it because they just didn't know.
Right.
Nobody wants to be a polluter. So I feel like if we could raise the consciousness, that's really all that it takes, especially in a place like Ann Arbor. I used to live in Tucson, Arizona, which is close to some of the national observatories. And that's a city that's a metro area of about 1 million people, and you can see the Milky Way from the middle of Tucson. So, you know, these are places where they have had a lighting ordinance for decades, where the public is well aware that this is an important commodity and that they buy into it. And so they're like the model for lighting ordinances and municipalities where people are.
Must be a charming city to be in at night then.
I'm sorry?
It must be a charming city to be in at night then.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a big city.
But
It has
still,
its charming places, yes.
The quality of the lighting.
Yes, the quality of lighting.
Is completely different.
It's completely different. It's not harsh, it's mellow, and it has its own ambiance.
Paris.
Just a few thoughts, and thank you, Ms. Louie, for all of your patience and pushing on this for many months now. I had the luxury of growing up both in town and out in the country and seeing the dichotomy of that, being able to or not see the Milky Way drew me to this, as well as my other environmental work. And I was also proud to be working for the city when in my department, the natural area department, pushed for the ordinance in 2009. So, you know, when we protected all the birds, and then LED lights came out and blasted out of the water the amount of light pollution that we're having now. So, you know, we need, as advocates for environmental issues, we need to understand how the changes that we're making systemically are also creating new problems, and then being able to resolve those are important. But to your credit, and thank you very much, you do work as an individual and a collective well with the system, and I appreciate that. You're working with the Energy Commission and through Nate and his supervisors has garnered a lot of support. And for this body and for you, as you know, the administrator and the staff have already taken into consideration a number of your comments, and I don't know that I've circled around to you, but when you contacted Chip and I a week or so ago, I wrote to the administrator, Chip and I wrote to the administrator and asked for the two major components that you had requested, the less than 3,000 K and the max lumens for lighting, and the administrator noted that they can do that internally for our own lighting, and we'll be processing that in. So your advocacy is working already, and so thank you. And then the thing that I would put forward to this body, just because I'm not going to be able to push for this in coming months, would be, I think that there, as Commissioner Gimbrandl states, there are a number of things that we could be doing better in this arena that I think that we could sit down and think through for a little bit and try to craft an advocacy piece or a resolution to City Council to push for a few other things. A long-range plan would be one. I think internally we can do most of this work as an organization, but a long-term plan is something that would be good to have on the books that we could push for in the coming years, that then 20 years from now we have greater successes. And I think that it's something that we should roll into the natural features ordinance at some point in the future. I think that would be a useful scenario for another set of reasons. So I'd push for more inclusion of this in other ways, and thank you.
Well, I want to really thank Councilmember Frenzel for all of his support and encouragements and the helpful conversations that we've had. And yes, I think while we know there's a lot of sources of light pollution right now, as mentioned, nobody wants to be doing that. So I think thoughtful legislation that would allow the people who are that this applies to kind of gracefully become compliant over a period of time, I think would be very helpful.
Have you advocated with the university? Are they doing something about it?
We would like to. We have not started there yet, but yes, we are certainly planning to do that, since the U of M has more streetlights, as we just talked about, than the city does, and we would like to approach DTE also. We do have a sizable group of people, and we are just trying to get enough people who have the time to take on all of these different fronts. So it's just a matter of time.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much. That was really informative and helpful.
And thank you very much. I have handouts of my talk also, if you would be interested.
Great. And we can load this presentation up on Legistar, so it would be
Yeah, so just a reminder, if you would email that to me, I will get that posted up on the website.
Thank you. Now we are on to report from committees and chairs. I would like to bring back the metrics committee, that the work that we had done on the metrics committee, and ask for feedback about what targets the commission would like to follow as a commission. And the one that I proposed was the responsible resource use, which covers the % of waste that is diverted from landfills and recycled. And the sustainability dashboard says that our progress is good, but it's drawing this data from the National Citizen Survey, which is not a scientific body. It's a survey where people say, are you happy with your recycling services? And people say, yes. But it doesn't talk to us about how much we're recycling, how to improve the recycling. So the metric that we're currently using doesn't seem to be quite the right one. The other thing that makes this timely is that the solid waste plan expires in December. And we are going to get a presentation at our next meeting that will reflect the recycling sort, and we'll also have staff bringing us their plans for putting out an RFP for the solid waste plan. So this would be a good opportunity for us to speak up and to ask that they include things that we propose. The plan that we currently have, which does expire in December, we've made some progress on it. We have initiated a food waste composting plan, and we expanded the plan to include plate scrapings, and we've expanded zero waste educational efforts. But we have not increased single-family diversion rates from 50% to 60%. And we have not increased total citywide diversion rates from 31% to 40%. And we have not implemented the 2008 citywide commercial recycling plan with mandated recycling at all city non-residential locations. So I want to put this out there, and I also want to ask for your thoughts ahead of time and your questions. If you could send them to me or tell me them right now, I can pass them on to staff, and we can make sure that we get answers to things that we're really curious about and answers to questions that we have. And I would also like to open it up to the commission to see if there are other goals that someone else proposed that we follow. This will be a big one. It's okay if there's not another one. So take all of our time. But are there others? Commissioner Graham.
Well, you could have chosen one of the other super groups of our sustainability framework, and I might not have been as excited as I am by this one, because it really includes not just recyclables and solid waste, but it also includes our environment and how we sustain it. And this is sort of the era of making bold statements, but when one looks at what might happen as a result of climate change over the next 50 years, we may have people moving to Michigan rather than Texas, and rather than California, and rather than Florida, because we have water and an extraordinary natural environment, especially north of Clare. But we also have one that's really quite special in Ann Arbor, and we are not doing the things we need to do to sustain it. And we need to. And this is not something that Ann Arborites don't want to do. They just need our encouragement and guidance and suggestions and knowledge in order to know what to do. And what I mean by that is an outreach program that really goes into the neighborhoods and works with people about what's there and how they should treat it. And one runs the gamut from how they handle stormwater to how they handle their grass and insecticides, and how they take care of the big trees in their yard. Thank you for picking the one that includes those things.
My pleasure. Well, I also wanted to give an update about the MRF. I exchanged emails with Crescent to find out what was going on about the conveyor belt and the baling. And the issue is that there are two conveyors. One of them works and the other doesn't, and both conveyors need to function in order to bale. So there is no baling happening right now. And we had heard that because we're not baling, we're not able to separate the high-value cardboard from the other recycling, which was costing us about $1,000 a day. But it recently happened that the market for cardboard dropped 36% within a week. And so now there is a question, about whether or not we'd be losing $600 a day as opposed to $1,000 a day. When it drops that quickly, there's no guarantee that it won't drop again. So I think the staff is really wrestling right now with whether it's worth investing capital in replacing the conveyor belt and operating the baler again, or if it's just appropriate for this interim contract to continue to loose load the recycling and drive it to Cincinnati. So that's the update with that. And
What's it cost to replace the belt?
I don't know.
There are more problems than just that, though.
Well,
There's-
yes, they had to throw away one of the belts and the conveyor isn't working, so it's going to be a substantial
some
investment,
sort
but
of
I don't know how much. it
Loading
costs.
wall that's broken or something, so, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole place is really pretty in trouble.
Yes. But it's my understanding that conveyor is the key part of the baling operation in the sorter, so. So that is the update on that. Are there any questions about that? All right. Could we ask for a report from other committees? Could you give us a report on the pollinators committee?
I don't have one at the moment.
Okay, fair enough. Any other committees met since we last met? All right. Are there reports from other commissions? Can I ask for an update from Parks and then Planning?
We bought 2 Zambonis,
All right.
and we're saving one of the old ones, so we've got a spare.
All right.
We're relining the pools, which is exciting. They used to do expensive maintenance on them every year with concrete, and they're getting PVC liners that should last 20 years. I only mention this because it's very nice to see that Parks is sort of taking sustainability to heart. Also, systems planning will be moving ahead on the stormwater improvement project around Sister Lake, which is a project which has had 40-plus years of citizen involvement trying to find a way to be able to stop one of Ann Arbor's, perhaps Ann Arbor's only natural lake from eutrophying, which since this was last investigated in '98 has become 4 feet shallower in that time. So yeah, that's exciting stuff. We also voted no finding on the Fuller Road station, so Parks decided that there would be no significant impact. However, I would say, as a Parks Commissioner, that it is important for this body to try to make sure that we are always keeping trails and alternative recreation and the sort of sustainable nature of that in mind as we move forward, particularly thinking about uses of the old train station site, if this is indeed happening, and ways that the border-to-border trail and other trail networks connect through that park. We've got a great opportunity through vigilant citizenship to be able to make sure that these things happen with this change that's happening down there. So that is it in a nutshell from the Parks Advisory Commission.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Could we have a report from Planning, too?
Yeah, we haven't had too many projects that have been a lot of more urban projects, things that haven't necessarily had, a lot of overlap with the stuff that we're doing here, other than with every project, we look at, our night sky stuff. There's always, cutoff optics and things like that. There's always, stormwater components. I would say that there was one project that was rejected because of some charter oaks, and that was really the sole reason. So that it's pretty rare that something gets rejected, purely on that reason alone. So we'll see if it resurfaces or not, but there were some 300-year-old oaks that were going to be cut down and mitigated for, and people decided that was just a little bit too much.
Where is this?
On Packard Road, right next to the Cobblestone Farm. there's a parcel there that is heavily wooded, has an old house on it,
Oh, yeah.
surrounded by city on all sides, but there's a pretty intact portion of it that's woodland, and then there are some old kind of fence row bur oaks in there that were going to be cut down as part of the development, so.
The commission said no, has the council voted?
I don't think so. I don't know
Has
that
not
he's
voted.
even going forward or not, or if it's going to come back in a different form, or what.
Very good.
So we've seen a lot of activity on the north side of town. So there's a lot of things happening over in that area that are all kind of vying for a lot of public attention, I'd say. So we don't necessarily have ways to think about how all these things layer on top of one another and may compound each other. So I think that's a challenge for us as a city, frankly, in terms of how we review and pass things with that in mind. We don't have very clear procedures about how things may affect each other in terms of studies and things like that. So it's a little tricky. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Clevey, could you give us an update from Energy?
Certainly. Most of our thinking of late has been sort of dominated by assessing the solar program that was launched this year, new Ann Arbor solar program, whose aim is to amp up the solar installations in the city in accordance with the Climate Action Plan's goal of installing 24 megawatts of new solar by 2010. We're not on track to meet that goal. As part of what we're looking at now is the lessons learned from the program that went on this year, what we can hope to do better, what things we can take and learn from the program and amp up in the next program, and what we can do in next year to launch an expanded effort that meets a couple of things. One, it makes much better use of local solar businesses that work and live here, and really this is their bread and butter and stuff, and so helping those companies to do what they do best, which is install solar, and in some cases just removing some barriers and things like that, and other incentives things. So mostly that's what we're looking at doing, is relaunching that program and getting on track with our goal, which is to meet the 24 megawatts by 2010.
Commissioner Friendly?
Couple things from council.
Yeah.
Council has been struggling with the ground-mounted solar zoning, so it's been pushed up to us, and there's been ongoing debate regarding what that should and shouldn't look like, and staff is in for some more evaluation for us right now, so that should come back in the next couple months. We currently have a second sitting 180-day moratorium, which you might imagine from our standpoint, my version of that is quite frustrating, but that's the political process. So we're in the middle of looking at that. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is there's an election coming up. Is that next 2 weeks from now?
I heard something about that.
And there's a couple things on the ballot. One, some representatives for, if you live in the city of Ann Arbor, there's a couple representatives up for a potential re-election. And so I urge everybody to get out and vote. Also, the county's safety and mental health resolution is up. And as we all know and have talked about, that would likely produce a high boon for climate change work in the city of Ann Arbor. So if you as residents would like to advocate on that, on behalf of that resolution, you should feel free to do so.
Anything else? All right, great. Could we please have a staff update?
Sure. I had a couple of learning events. We were invited to New Haven to talk with a bunch of cities and universities and how they work together. So went with staff from U of M talking about kind of a 7-year partnership we've had getting good climate data and how we built that into our climate adaptation work. And then I just got back from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network meeting, which is all was great, and Paul Hawken was the speaker, and he gave a great talk about his new book, Drawdown, and very compelling, but it's very, it's global, so it's things like educating young girls and family planning is a huge reduction in carbon when you look at all of these things, but as city people, we're all trying to figure out, okay, what's our role in doing that as opposed to onshore wind or, other things. So I don't have clear answers, but I would recommend that book as a compelling new way to think about how the world solves climate. So at the conference, a lot of work on climate adaptation. Obviously, all the coastal communities are concerned about sea level rise, and Boston has $85 billion worth of real estate that's at risk. A lot of talk about microgrids, various vulnerability assessments, how to get deeper into understanding the risks of city assets from climate change. Locally, with our closed landfill and the new change in the 1,4-dioxane standard, which should go into official effect, I think, any day now. I haven't heard that it's gotten through JCAR yet, but we've been delineating, which means we have to do some testing in Mary Beth Doyle Park in that area north of the landfill. And the good news is the 3 test wells we did were non-detect, so we don't think it's expanded at that low level all the way up to, I think it's Miller's Creek. And there's no drinking water wells there, so we don't think there's any exposure, but it's just good to know that most of it's been contained on site. You may notice there'll be some work going on at the Broadway Village Lower Town site. The state of Michigan is doing some additional sampling to better understand the hydrogeology there and the remedy that's been proposed by the developer, which is basically a permeable reactive barrier that as the contamination moves through the property, you can put iron filings, things like that, that will knock down the concentrations. To pump and treat groundwater with PERC is extremely cost prohibitive, and again, under Michigan law, this developer isn't required to do any cleanup at all. So this is where the Brownfield Projects is supporting the installation of that barrier. We did put in an application to the Mayor's Challenge with Bloomberg Philanthropies. And while not purely environmental, it's all about affordable housing and how do we make Ann Arbor more affordable. So Jen Hall was a big part of that. The city recently updated its hazard mitigation plan, and I think that's public. Parts of it are redacted because there's some homeland security kind of issues. The good news is it was grant funded, Stantec did it, and it's got an incredibly significant focus on climate, which is new and appropriate. Nate is in the middle of updating the Green Fleets policy, so that's something that should come before you once that draft is finished. And we continue to meet and try and figure out how to make zero waste events work. So I think there's a recommendation that's going to be going to the administrator fairly soon. And a lot of it is just built on this idea of capacity building, and what kind of events should be covered and not. So it's like all things, you get in the weeds, because there's hundreds of special events, and with new costs like costs for barriers and protection on streets, there's also a concern that how much new cost are we adding to these events if the city's not playing a role in supporting that. So I think that's it, unless somebody has questions.
Matt, observation, I too am a real fan of Paul Hawken and that book, and I'd like to extend an invitation to you if you could be interested in coming to the Energy Commission and giving us a short presentation on Paul Hawken's lecture. And
sure.
What you cover the full with it, but also I'm sure you thought about it. So what can we do locally and stuff like that? Because I think his compendium is good for a number of reasons. One, I love the fact that he measures everything, which
right.
gives us some idea of how we could do things ourselves. I'm still trying to figure out what the emissions reduction is per a rain barrel in Ann Arbor, and hopefully it'll come to me eventually. But I would, seriously, I'd love it if you could come give a presentation on that and what you thought, because I think it's very timely and it's a great book.
Yeah, it's a great question to kind of look at it and go, okay, what are the role of
Yeah,
cities?
yeah.
And, you know, because I think a bunch of people there were like, well, we can do this, and then maybe I make donations in my private life to solve some of these
Right.
other things that, you know, as a city government, we're not playing a role in.
I thought his stuff on electric vehicles was very timely and interesting, you know, and I think we're going to be faced with some really interesting questions on, you know, that whole issue. You know, if we're going to have it be a world center for electric vehicles powered by frack gas and coal, or are we going to, you know, how are we really going to grapple with this issue? And he raises some good questions, but also I think again some measurements which we can use to help us guide us. Are we getting to where we think we're going, and we're measuring the right things?
Right.
So I really much extend an invitation for you to come talk about his lecture. Maybe do you still have his slides? Did they?
I don't know if we have his
They're on
slides.
the
I can
website.
find out.
Yeah, I'm seriously, we'd love to have you come do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Are there any items for the next meeting agenda? Commissioner Graham?
Where are we on the lighting ordinance? Is it up at council, or are we still working on it?
We are not working on a lighting ordinance right now.
Can you send us the draft of the one we did 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, so
The
we can look at it in light of the testimony this evening?
Sure, and I think in between there's and I didn't ask the question, but we were waiting for a long time for a model lighting ordinance to come out. And then when it did come out, it seemed extremely clunky to work with and lots of enforcement questions. And so I'm not sure if you know of, I haven't looked at it in several years, so if you know of other cities that have, or whether their people are actually using the model lighting ordinance, that would be helpful.
Maybe Tucson's ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have access to Tucson's. I also have the Brighton and Scioto ones. I have the model lighting ordinance that was put together by the International Dark Sky Association in collaboration with the Implementing Engineering Society, which is probably the one that you must be referring to.
It is.
And I don't know whether it's been updated since the time that you looked at it, but I'd be happy to provide all of the above. And if there are specific issues that you're interested, I can certainly try to see, you know, through our connections, if we know cities that have addressed the issues that you're concerned about.
Yeah, I think it was, the implementation part was the question of like who's going out with a light meter, checking on compliance, and, but maybe you and I can follow up.
Sure, yeah. I'd be happy to, thank you.
And piggybacking on that, I'd be curious about that too, because one of the pictures you showed was a building that was just put through Planning Commission not that many years ago, and it's got all kinds of uplighting which never likely would have passed. And so I'm wondering, we have the ordinance, and then there's the reality in terms of what you're talking about. And I just see a lot of examples of uplighting on newer buildings that technically probably were not submitted, but are just done after the fact. And so what tools do we have to
Right.
be able to,
And that may
besides just
be more
adding
of
more
a
staff? Like, are there
Derek,
other ways to?
Brett question.
And there again, I think the simple existence of guidelines, ordinance, whatever. when
Excuse me,
people
can I ask you to
submit
come to the podium, because otherwise we can't hear you on,
Right, right.
thank you.
The simple existence of a lighting ordinance or even any kind of guidelines from the city, right, would be very helpful when a new construction project goes in. Because as I was alluding to previously, people do not want to willingly pollute, right? Now, architectural lighting is one thing. So if you took all the architectural lighting in Ann Arbor and compared that as a percentage of what all the polluting light was the source from, I doubt the architectural lighting is going to be the majority of it, right? So probably, my guess is if people only knew what the rules were, and they would look at the rules and they would understand why they're there, once they've built their light, it's there. So I actually think that, yes, enforceability is an issue, But just getting the new projects to be compliant in the first place will be a huge step in the right direction.
When you submit for site plan submission, you have to have an entire lighting package. So that actually is reviewed, and there are standards for all of that. And you
Okay.
cannot have foot candles leave at the border of your site. And so there are extremely clear standards for all of that.
I see.
I think what happens is that people come in after the fact and have other lighting plans, and there's not good mechanisms in place for there to be enforcement of, hey, just a second, you added a bunch of uplighting on that, and that wasn't on your site plan submission plan. So there's an entire sheet that is separate from the, like, everything else in the package that shows exactly what the existing conditions are and what your proposed conditions are for your lighting. So that's there. That's already there.
Okay.
The question is, how can we take it from that level to the actual in the field, people are living with lights and adding them, and what tools do we have besides hiring 5 people to go out and check everything, which is not going to happen, right? So what sort of system could we have in place in terms of citizens being more aware and saying, hey, how can they get away with that uplighting? I'm going to report
See,
it to,
click, fix.
you know, exactly. It's like, is there some other mechanism that we can use to be able to, and part of it is just awareness, like you're talking about, but there are very clear standards in place that you have to approve as a petitioner. So it's not that.
Okay.
That part's done.
Thank you for mentioning
Yeah,
that.
that's done. It's just, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't be better, but that's there. It's just that it's the
Interesting.
beyond that it starts getting complicated.
It seems to me that the noise ordinance could be very related.
Yeah, right.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a statement before the end of the meeting. This is my last meeting with you guys. So it is my second to last council meeting. I have a meeting on the 9th. And so it is with great pleasure that this is my second to last meeting. I would choose to spend it with no others than you all. So thank you very much. Thank you for my last few years with you guys. It's been fabulous, and I'm sure I'll see you around. And if I can ever be of any use, please give me a call. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
On that same vein, I think the entire city owes Mr. Frenzel a big thank you for all of the work that he has put in on this commission and at City Council. He has been an invaluable member championing a number of really important things. My hope is that he continues to remain engaged. He's done so much for us. He's such a good friend, and he brings so much to the table. We'll certainly miss you, but we expect to continue working together.
Office hours are moving from Northside Grill to the pub, so.
Well, that was also on my list of things to say, just to thank you very much for your service and to say how valuable you've been as a colleague and how much we appreciate it. Our next scheduled meeting, I was wrong when I sent out the email. It's not December 6th, it's December 7th. It's the Thursday. Sorry about that. So that will be our next scheduled meeting. Is there anyone who would like to offer public comment now? All right. Well, if there are no takers, I will adjourn this meeting at 8:17 p.m. Thank you, everybody.